and welcome. My name is McKenna Sellers. I'm the Executive Director for the Montana Renewable Energy Association, MREA. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar today for Montana CPACE financing updates, is expanding opportunities for resilience and safety. We're glad to have you here for what I think is a very timely and important conversation. Today's webinar is focused on Montana's CPACE financing program and recent updates that are expanding its impact across the state. As many of you know or may be familiar, CPACE is a powerful tool that enables commercial property owners to access long-term, low-cost financing for energy efficiency, renewable energy, and water conservation improvements. And now with recent updates that came through the passage of a bill in 2025, Senate Bill 458, we're seeing that impact grow even further. Eligibility has been expanded to include resilience and safety upgrades, which unlocks new opportunities for building owners to invest in projects that enhance durability, reduce risk, and support long-term operational stability. So before we dive in, just a quick housekeeping note, this webinar is being recorded and we will send the recording out to our registrants afterward. You'll be able to revisit this content and share it with others. We will also make this slide deck available on our website, and we'll make this recording available on MREA's YouTube page. A quick note about MREA. For those who might be newer to our organization, we're a statewide nonprofit dedicated to advancing renewable energy for all Montanans through education, advocacy, and industry engagement. We work across policy, workforce development, and public education to help scale practical, affordable, clean energy solutions across Montana. If you're not yet a member, I'd encourage you to consider joining MREA. Your membership supports this work directly, helps us host webinars such as this, helps us put on education events in person and online, and helps us stay connected with you on policy updates, industry insights, and educational opportunities just like this one. So I'll put that membership link in the chat if you want to get more involved with MREA, and we would love to have you be a part of that. We have members ranging from households to businesses and renewable energy professionals, so we'd love to have you as a part of this network. This conversation today is especially relevant because Montana continues to evolve the tools available to finance energy and infrastructure improvements. One important example of that is SB 458, which was sponsored by Senator Ken Bogner of Miles City during the legislative session. And this was a bill that MREA supported during the session in 2025. This expands the types of projects eligible under CPACE to include public safety and resiliency improvements. While that might sound like a pretty modest policy shift in that bill, it had significant real-world implications. Resiliency improvements can include things like backup power systems, energy storage, grid interactive technologies that would not only improve building performance, but enhance reliability and safety. And importantly, many of these resiliency strategies align directly with MREA's clean energy goals, especially as we think about pairing renewable energy with battery storage and designing buildings that can better withstand climate disruptions. So we'll dig into that connection a bit more as we move through today's webinar. With that context in mind, I'm pleased to introduce our featured speaker, Carolyn Jones. Carolyn is the CPACE Program Manager of the Montana Facility Finance Authority, or MFFA. MFFA operates under Montana Department of Commerce and focuses on supporting community development and healthcare across the state by improving access to cost-effective capital financing and development services through tools like conduit bonding and programs like CPACE. Carolyn brings a deep expertise in how this program works in the real world and how these recent updates are opening up new doors for projects across Montana. So with that, I will turn it over to Carolyn to walk us through Montana's CPACE program, recent updates, and how these resiliency measures are becoming a bigger part of the picture for future projects. So Carolyn, thank you again for taking the time, and take it away.
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for taking the time to sit in on the webinar today, and hope to just give you a little bit more background as far as what the expansion of the new improvements in the program can help along with projects. So basically just CPACE financing. We run the program here at the MFFA, Montana Facility Finance Authority. It is a statewide program, so all projects across the state in a district operate under the same set of guidelines using the same documentation and process. So basically, CPACE, another government acronym, because we can't have enough of those. So Commercial Property Assessed Capital Enhancements. It's basically a financing structure that allows property owners that are in those approved CPACE districts to borrow private sector funds. So again, these are private sector banks and credit unions and capital providers that are providing the funds to the private sector property owners to pay for permanent fixed improvements that along the line of energy efficiency, water conservation, renewable energy, and then, as McKenna alluded to earlier, as of October 1st last year, with some new building resiliency and public safety measures that are now eligible as well. It is a little bit of an innovative financing structure in the fact that it is a special assessment that is attached to the property as the collateral, as opposed to like a UCC financing, and the property owner repays the CPACE assessment via their property tax bill. So 2 payments a year in November and May when those property taxes are due, as opposed to more of a traditional monthly principal and interest payment on an equipment loan. The eligible types of properties throughout the state, commercial, again, we are not allowed to do residential PACE. We can do multifamily with 5 or more dwellings, as well as industrial, mixed use, ag. And we can help finance these types of improvements that are involved in either retrofit, new construction, or we can even look retroactively at improvements that have been made by property owners up to 3 years in the past and get them some financing back for those. The types of eligible measures under the energy and water efficiency and renewable energy, which again are improvements that were authorized for the program back in the original legislation in 2021. And eligible from the launch of the project and the program in 2022 are your typical energy efficiency systems, HVAC, building envelope, elevators, lighting. And again, these are permanent fixed improvements. We're not able to do like any sort of Energy Star appliances or just the screw-in light bulbs, but the actual ballast and the lighting infrastructure we're able to do. And then again, for the water efficiency, we can do water reuse, low flow plumbing fixtures. And then on the renewable energy side, we can do the solar, geothermal cogeneration, biomass, battery storage as well too. And then really, as for the heart of this particular webinar today, which was really just to expand on the additional measures that are now eligible as of October 1st, are public safety and resiliency improvements. So this slide basically shows you the language that is in the statute and added to the statute last year. So we're able to add financing options for property owners that are looking at doing some sort of structural integrity for seismic events, indoor air quality, the durability to resist the wind, fire, flood, the electrical power outage, and then the stormwater, as well as firearm storage infrastructure for use by the public pursuant to a firearm hold agreement. That is a very particular set of circumstances where a project would fall under that. So for the most part of this presentation, I'm going to cover really the first 5 bullets on that, but happy to take any questions on this. To go into these a little bit more detail, basically, again, structural integrity for seismic events, and these are more of a risk mitigation as opposed to a true immediate dollar savings type of project with the energy and water efficiency. These are going to help businesses and properties either not be as impacted from a future event or being able to come back a lot quicker. I think of the situations of the floods in Red Lodge and in Gardner over the last few years, and think of the businesses that were coming back from the circumstances that they were in due to those natural disasters. And being able to rebuild with resiliency in mind would help them again to maybe minimize or mitigate some of the damage and the ability to bounce back from those types of events. So to get into this in a little bit more detail, again, the types of improvements that we envision within the kind of bare bone language of the structural integrity for the seismic events, are going to be things to reinforce the building, reinforce the walls, the windows, the utility fixtures, things like that. Indoor air quality is another broad category. So we are interpreting that to basically allow for property owners that are needing to remediate any sort of asbestos or indoor lead paint, mold, radon, as well as they install like permanent, real good, strong air filtration systems for their building to help emphasize that indoor air quality. If any of you on the call are familiar with brownfields, I see that this is just a way to help supplement and leverage some brownfields fundings that can help pay for remediation for some of these same type of impacts to a building. So we can just help stretch those dollars a little further. On the durability to resist wind, fire, and flooding, our interpretation again is on wind, again being able to help really with the structural foundation and the ability to withstand higher strengths of wind or higher longer durations of windstorms. So again, items such as roof fortifications, wall reinforcements. With the fire, basically we're looking into fire protection systems in the buildings, as well as fire suppression systems. So, stronger fire doors, having more fire doors around different hallways or stairwells, putting in a fire suppression system or a fire alarm system. Again, anything to help really save on that impact from any sort of fire. As well as obviously something on the outside for, helping the building prevent being burned. So maybe metal roofing on that as well too. So flooding, again, installations or modifications to help any sort of mitigate or resist any sort of flood on that. So elevating that utility equipment that's maybe in the basement using water resistant materials in those types of improvements. Excuse me, the ability to withstand an electric power outage, again, pretty self-explanatory. We're looking at basically building backup generators and battery systems on that. And then stormwater control measures, basically the language does allow for structural as well as non-structural measures to help mitigate that stormwater. So really in the design factor on that or retrofitting type of exams, looking at how a structure is situated, where are the parking lots, where are the landscape areas, and then improvements such as permeable pavement on green roofs and possibly some underwater cisterns in some maybe flood prone areas. And then again, the last bullet point of that firearm storage infrastructure that is allowed pursuant to the firearm hold agreement. So core requirements for last-based PACE projects, basically all projects must be an approved CPACE district. Again, I referenced earlier, we operate a statewide program with all templates and documentation standardized across the state. The local governments do need to opt in though to have that allow those property owners the option to participate in the program. So that's basically working with the county to approve a district. If a county is unable or unwilling to adopt a district, we will work with cities and towns that are incorporated. All projects also, if there is existing debt on the property, such as a mortgage or other lien filed against the property, the property owner is required to get lender consent from those existing debt holders to move forward with the project. Contractors that are providing the required documentation as well as doing the actual improvement installations do have to be registered with the program. Registration is basically filling out information about your business on a contractor application on the program's website. And then we do have the ability again, to do retrofit projects as well as new construction projects. So retrofit projects, we're going to look at those replacements of existing and operational equipment being at or above current code. And then new construction to meet that efficiency definition need to be above code for those improvements. The core requirements, again, for the energy conservation projects, which again are the energy efficiency, the water conservation, and the renewable energy, must have an energy assessment done. That is completed by a third party, and that is required to document what the costs of the project are, as well as what those energy savings are going to be. Those projected energy savings are typically calculated by the contractor coming in, looking at what the property owner is using or has an idea for making their project move forward, and looking at what their current existing energy costs are for a retrofit project, and then looking at what those future costs will be and calculating that savings, comparing what that new system or that replacement system will be able to cost them going forward. So again, it's going to calculate reduced energy costs as well as typically reduced ongoing operating costs, especially for a lot of the older systems that are in place that require a lot more ongoing maintenance than replacing that with a new eligible system would be. Under the public safety and the resiliency projects, again, this is new. It only became effective October 1st. So basically, and again, this is more of a risk mitigation type of documentation. So that's going to show that as opposed to an immediate energy savings. So again, it's more of a hedge against future expenses, future risks. So the documentation for those types of projects does need to show what the existing or the baseline requirements are. So in the case of resistance to wind, and I'm just going to throw out some numbers here, maybe a wall needs to be able to be built to withstand 80-mile-per-hour winds sustained for a 2-hour period of time. But in your project, you're looking at basically making that wall be able to sustain 100-mile-per-hour winds for that same 2-hour window. So what we need at the project level is just documentation supporting what that kind of baseline code requirement would be, and the differences are in the actual project that this particular property owner is looking at making and how those differ and fit into that resiliency category. On that part too. And then just a note that the program does reserve the right, once we get those documentations in place, to require an independent third-party review of that documentation if for some reason something doesn't seem like it's within standard within base industry standards, or if some of the cost numbers seem out of range from what the program has typically seen on that. Just in general, here's kind of a high-level overview of the process itself. Basically, we just encourage as many people as possible that are looking at a project to contact the program early in their project to have a general discussion just to make sure what they're looking at doing is eligible, that they are located in an eligible CPACE district, so that local government has approved that district and has that in place. If that's not the case and we haven't approached them and they haven't said no, we're always willing to work in parallel with the development with the project of also developing and getting that CPACE district approved by the local government. Property owner then would go ahead and obtain that lender consent if there is existing debt on the property. They would select the contractors. Again, this program is completely voluntary. Property owners don't have to participate. They can if it works best for them. And it is truly an open market system where they're allowed to select and pick their contractors that they work with as well as their lenders. So they're going to select a contractor, they're going to obtain any of that required documentation for the program, get that submitted to the program along with a project application, and then the program will just do an initial review to see if there's additional information needed or any sort of additional documentation. The owner then is going to select their lender and secure that financing for that CPACE project, and then the loan's going to be closed and the assessment recorded. They're going to, again, work with their contractor of their choice to get the project completed, pay that contractor, and then again, that repayment is made via the property tax bill twice a year. Here's a kind of an economic example of the benefit of CPACE. It typically is not meant to replace senior lending or senior debt on a property. It really is meant to help come in and finance any other types of supplemental projects that would require mezzanine or other sort of secondary financing and or additional equity that the property owner would need to put in. So this is just an example of an $800,000 project with typically going into a traditional loan environment credit decision. With a mezzanine loan, they're going to maybe get right now an interest rate of around 15%. Again, typically equipment loans going to be 5 to 10 years. 10 years was pretty generous, probably 5 to 7 years. And so for an example on this one, that they're going to be making, again, probably monthly payments, but those monthly payments on an annual basis are going to total about $125,000 in outlay for their debt for a 10-year period. As opposed to a CPACE financing, which again is going to be a longer term, lower interest rate. So interest rate, again, for this example, 8% using a 20-year term. Is going to require an annual payment of $65,000. So again, about half of what that property owner would be paying in a more traditional mezzanine loan by going through the CPACE financing. The length of the term in CPACE is tied to the to the useful life of the improvements, or an average useful life for a package of improvements. So again, a longer term, we've got terms for existing projects anywhere from 15 to 30-year terms. This is just a recap kind of where we are now at the program. Again, the program launched in January of 2022. We have 24 counties and 5 cities that have approved CPACE districts. So again, property owners within these blue areas are eligible to come into the program and work with us to get their project qualified and find the contractors and the lenders that can provide the work that they need. This represents about 73% of the commercial buildings covered. We do continually work with additional local governments to try to get districts approved. So our recap for our projects, we've done 8 total projects to date, 2 new construction, the 3 retrofits, and 3 renewable energy. We've done about $10 million in CPACE actual financings, and that has generated a total benefit of just shy of $30 million for the property owners. So again, that's both savings in those projected savings, again, ongoing energy costs and operational costs, as well as some projects have had projected additional revenue. So the improvements have allowed them to, in one circumstance, increase the leasable space in a building because the systems were in place to better supply the building for their needs. In addition to the continued outreach we do at the local government, we always continue to have current discussions with potential CPACE projects. My next few slides are just a copy of some examples of projects that we've done in Montana, and then I'm going to be happy to take any questions that you might have. And then this is basically the Hedden Empire building. This is a building that was built in 1929 in downtown Billings. As you can imagine, it was not operating as efficiently as it could be. This was one of the projects where they had additional revenue as well too. They were not able to lease 100% of the space out due to the systems and the conditions. So we did a retrofit for this commercial office retail property. They were able to find about $1.4 million of improvements that met the eligibility with the soft costs that are able to be financed for the project. They did $1.6 million in financing. And again, in ongoing operational costs or savings, as well as energy savings, additional revenue, and avoided cost of capital, because they were looking at financing this with mezzanine debt at a rate of 16%. This particular project was able to get a rate of about 8.5% for their, I believe, 30-year term on this one. And so that's going to save that property owner a significant amount of money as well as additional revenue to really offset the costs of that $1.6 million in improvements to be able to recognize over $13 million in savings and revenue. This particular project, they looked at doing a variable rate as opposed to a fixed rate financing, which is more traditional for CPACE. And we were able to work with them to where the lender and the borrower will get together and do a rate reset no sooner than every 5 years. And then we just include a list of the various project partners we have on the project. We've also done this particular project. The same property owner owns 2 other hotels, another one in Butte and one in Bozeman. He chose to add solar panels to the roof of each of these 3 properties. So it was just a renewable energy only project, and they basically financed 100% of each of these projects, just under $250,000 for each project, and they're going to recognize anywhere from $80,000 to about $120,000 in net savings over the life of those solar panels. They were also able to, because these are private sector funds with the private sector property owner, they were also able to recognize and realize some tax credits that were in place at the time, as well as a USDA Rural Development REAP reimbursable grant award. This is a project, another retrofit. So this is close to 19th and Main in downtown Bozeman. It's the Old Town and Country grocery store where a different property owner came in, purchased the property, and did a retrofit to make it into a co-working office space. They will be having their open house, kind of their main open house coming up in May. I just was actually at this property last week. It's a very beautiful property with a lot of co-working spaces available, and they were able to, again, finance and identify $1.8 million worth of improvements, including HVAC, some lighting upgrades, helping that building envelope, going through and finding some areas where they could do some water conservation in their retrofit project. They'll be able to recognize about $4.8 million of savings over the project, over the lifetime of those utility improvements and projects. Next, we've done Montana Premium Processing Cooperative. This is a meat processing facility up in Havre. They did a retrofit project in renewable energy, adding solar panels as well as some freezer equipment upgrades that they needed to do. They also were able to recognize some USDA Rural Development reimbursable grant awards, and they financed just under $230,000, and they'll be able to recognize savings over those 15 years for $374,000. And then the most recent project that we just closed last month is a 12-unit new construction apartment facility in Great Falls. That's a multifamily, so we financed just under $500,000 worth of some HVAC and water efficiency systems that they were able to put in that new construction project for a 16-year term, and they'll be able to recognize savings over that. This particular project, we don't have a full savings amount on there because this was looking at an incremental or the difference of using a more efficient system as opposed to just what was required of baseline in that new construction project. And with that, here's my contact information as well as my coworkers and our website address, lastbestpace.com, where you can find copies of our program guidelines, which goes into each of this information in a little bit more detail, as well as some marketing materials and case studies, which I showed you a brief example of a few of them. So with that, I will turn it over to McKenna to see if there's any questions in the chat that she wants to handle, or if you guys want to, I believe you have the opportunity to unmute yourself and just ask questions directly.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carolyn. Efficient, timely, such good information. And I know I'll be reviewing some of these slides to look at those awesome case studies. There is one question in the chat from Becky asking about the interest rate structure. And I know that for the CPACE program, you're always matching projects with private lenders, but could you tell us more about the variability of those interest rates, how they've changed over time, even since the existence of the CPACE program? Could you speak to some of that?
Of course, yeah. So with the projects being funded by private sector lenders, again, local and regional banks, credit unions, as well as national capital providers, that interest rate is able to be negotiated between the private sector borrower and the private sector lender. So the project does need to go through an underwriting process at the lender. So they are making sure that the project can cash flow and make those payments, for the next 15, 20 years. So those types of financial documentations that would be required by the lender. And then the rates have changed. I mean, I came on board helping with the program in late 2022 after it had launched in early. And we were starting to see some activity pick up. And then, of course, 2023, the interest rate environment changed. Interest rates for projects really, went through the roof there for a while, and they've settled back down. So again, in negotiating ability between the lender and the project owner, we were seeing in probably 2024, we were seeing projects financed around 8.5%. Our most recent projects that we've been financing are right around 6.5% to 7%. So traditionally, what we see across the nation is that CPACE financings tend to be about 200 points above the 10-year Treasury. That being said, a lot of our projects have been financed by Montana lenders, and they don't necessarily, look to the national trends. They just work again within their own credit requirements and worth that particular property owner.
Make sure I get myself off mute here. I had a question about the resiliency certifications that does feel slightly different than an energy audit as far as the professional standards that you might need in order to create such documentation. How has MFFA designed any sort of requirements? I imagine that having code compliance knowledge would be important, but are there any qualifications or requirements necessary that MFFA would require for someone to submit the resilience documentation, resilience upgrades,
Yeah, so our registered, we do require the contractors that are supporting that documentation for those feasibility, or excuse me, for the resiliency aspects. to be knowledgeable in their field. So we're going to be looking for those same types of licenses and certifications, so we're looking at, the wind resistance on a wall is going to be probably an engineer that's going to be looking at that and saying, okay, these are the standards. This is what this particular project is looking at doing. So again, the statute does require our program to have the contractors registered. They do fill out the application online. There are terms and conditions that the contractors agree to when they fill out that form. Primarily that that they have the appropriate knowledge and experience, that they carry the appropriate licensing, certifications, insurance requirements for their fields, and they're registered to do business within the state of Montana with the Montana Secretary of State. So with this being new, and I think we even have that language in our guidelines that this is new, we're kind of learning as we go with some of these newer resiliency projects. So we'll be able to get a better feel for that as we move forward with that too. One thing that will be of in particular interest to the MREA audience too is that one of the things that these new improvements allow us to do now is in our current statute under energy conservation or energy efficiency, water conservation, and renewable energy, our definitions very clearly state that these are for projects that are behind the meter. With the resiliency aspect, we don't have that same language limitation. So as long as the projects that at one time might not have quite met that requirement under the energy efficiency aspect or the renewable energy aspect, as long as we can now connect a resiliency benefit to that particular project, we can now start to look at some of those in front of the meter projects. For example, we're currently talking to a property owner that's looking at installing an in front of the meter solar system, and basically can qualify that project by building those panels and those mounting structures with a much higher, stronger wind resistant, fire resistant type of systems in place. So again, we're looking at that. We'll be looking at that engineer, those solar contractors that have the appropriate knowledge and certification in their field to look at what standard installation would be for a typical type of solar panel installation for solar field would be, and knowing that if they're building with a much stronger, much more fire resistant, wind resistant type of system and mounting systems, be able to qualify it that way under resiliency, we can now look at doing some of those in front of the meter projects that we would not have been able to do prior to this new resiliency language being in the statute.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Is there any workaround for nonprofits who don't pay property taxes to have CPACE, to access CPACE financing?
Yes, so actually nonprofits are eligible for CPACE financing. There's really no workaround, basically, as long as that nonprofit, that property has a parcel ID and is in the state's, or excuse me, yeah, the property tax system. It can have a CPACE assessment added to that property within the local government's tax software system and start to be billed. So my understanding is all properties are kind of assessed. There just might not get a bill under certain circumstances, tax exempt properties or nonprofits in that case. But the CPACE assessment, the same way a nonprofit can participate in a lighting improvement district or a sidewalk improvement district and just have that type of special assessment added to their property tax and start getting a billing where they wouldn't have previously. CPACE falls under that same category. So the county treasurer in the software system would add that CPACE assessment, and then that nonprofit who might not have gotten a property tax bill previously would start to get a tax bill every fall, and they would see that payment that would be due November and May along with the property tax process.
That's great. Yeah, no workaround required.
Exactly.
Make it happen. All right. Question from Shannon: is the Montana Facility Finance Authority the first stop for the process? Suppose that if that question means that you already have a project or an upgrade and you own the property, I imagine that answer is yes. But perhaps, Carolyn, if you want to speak to that more.
Yeah, exactly. We encourage anyone who has any sort of questions about the program or about their property and if it would, and the types of improvements that they're looking at doing to see if they're eligible. We encourage anyone to reach out directly. So again, my email and my phone number, that is my direct phone number. I'm typically in the office 5 days a week. So please feel free to reach out, and happy to visit with the project. And even if it's a case where for some reason the project doesn't quite qualify, I'm happy to. I've worked through the Montana Department of Commerce and various financing programs for about 18 years now. So if I might not have the right answer for the PACE program, I can probably refer you to some other resources that might be able to help you with your project as well too. So again, feel free to reach out, use me as a resource for the project. We can get going. If for some reason like I said, if the area that your particular project is located in wasn't in blue on that map I showed earlier, again, reach out to me. I'm more than willing. I'm right now trying to get some presentations scheduled in front of local governments. I'll be working with Choteau County, Blaine County, and also Phillips County here in the next month or so to get presentations in front of those county commissioners to see if they'll adopt a CPACE district for the businesses in their regions as well too. So we're continually trying to add those districts in place as well too.
Great. Okay, next question comes from Chris. You shared a few case study examples where the behind the meter PV systems were larger than the Northwestern Energy 50 kW net metering limit, and he was inquiring about how that was possible.
So projects, if they have the opportunity to do net metering with their provider, we're kind of agnostic in a lot of ways on our projects, with the utility billing, with any sort of rebates that you might qualify from your utility, any other sort of federal or local or regional state, either, financing programs like grant opportunities. Without this being federal money or state money that's funneled through the Montana Facility Finance Authority, this being truly private sector financing with a private sector property owner, property owners are able to take advantage of any and all of those and not run into any sort of federal or state program double dipping concerns. So again, any sort of utility rebates, any sort of net metering that they would qualify, they would basically just have that ability on their own.
Right. Also seeing from Nathan made a comment here about while the project would be dealing with their own interconnection with their respective utility, there could be potential for consuming that power if it's all used on site or exporting only to the point of the allowable export amount according to your utilities policy. So that's a potential too. All
Yeah.
right. That concludes all the questions that I'm seeing in the chat. I will close up here. So Carolyn, thank you so much for that presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us today. A couple quick takeaways to leave you all with. We know that CPACE is a powerful tool to unlock long-term low-cost financing for building improvements, and we saw a couple of those case studies today. I mean, the cost savings are right in front of us. And so with those recent updates expanding eligibility to include resiliency and safety upgrades, I'm personally very excited about the prospects for what could be included in future resiliency for building stock and what that means for battery and storage and potential future energy savings that are folded into resiliency. I just think that that's a very exciting prospect. So we're opening the door for projects that improve not just efficiency, but reliability and long-term stability. So that's becoming increasingly important. If today sparked ideas for a project for you, we encourage you to learn more, lastbestpace.com, and you're now introduced to Carolyn. She's an incredible resource, and like she said, even if CPACE isn't the right program for your project, I bet there's something at Department of Commerce that might be, and she knows a whole lot. So if you found this valuable, we'd love to keep you connected. Consider becoming a member of MREA to stay engaged with future policy updates, program updates like CPACE, industry insights, and future events. So thank you for being here. We hope to see you at future MREA events and webinars, and have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, McKenna.
Thanks, McKenna and Carolyn.